Okay. And the next speaker is Sutapa Biswas. She works across a variety of mediums, painting, drawing, film. And in her life and work, and growing up in an Indian household, goddesses have always been around. She told us that it was hanging above her bed, and it was on calendars and on the mantelpiece. And today she will tell us about one of her most recognized works, which is this one, but I think Sutapa will also show it, but I'll show it here on paper. As you can see, it's a multi-limbed woman with 4 arms. So the image of Kali comes to mind immediately. Yeah, she will talk more about this work. So please, Sutapa, if you're ready.
All right. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for the invitation today to speak with you, and moreover to Catherine and Nicole and Sarah to be involved in this publication. It's been quite an emotional journey for me, but I'm really delighted to be part of this. So today I want to really think about and talk about the subject of the goddess, and I've titled it on a piece that I've written for this forthcoming publication. And it's called Goddesses and Ghosts, A Life of Birds and Boats. Since its making in 1983 and 1985, my painting Housewives with Steak Knives has occupied, in many ways, a life of its own, becoming an iconic, recognizable work of the late 20th century. It began life in my studio during my undergraduate studentship at the University of Leeds, my hands moving soft Rembrandt pastels across a narrow strip of utilitarian paper to mark the presence of the brown face of a woman who resembled something like myself. It was as if the articulation came both from my body and some external force. Her tongue gesturing outwards, she looked back at me as if to command that I cut more strips of paper and add these to either side of her head, so making space to bring her body to life. I worked on the flat of her torso, adorning the tabard she wears with the ikat pattern borrowed from a tunic I had purchased locally from a fashion house and frequently wore at the time. Kali projecting herself outwards and back towards me, like the canvas sail of a boat caught in wind speed. Her arms grew wilder, occupying with certainty the large space of the paper folds behind her form, from which she emerged. In her lower right hand, Kali holds a rose and a small black and red flag, picturing a reproduction of Artemisia Gentileschi's painting. I'm trying to move that forward. Of Artemisia Gentileschi's painting of Judith slaying Holofernes, photocopied from the book Old Mistresses by Rosika Parker and feminist historian Griselda Pollock, who at the time was my tutor. The background painted in white, house paint, a reference to Raushenberg's series of white paintings of 1951. In 1985, it was the first time the iconic image of Kali, portrayed as an ordinary housewife, featured in the context of a major public art gallery in the UK. Almost a year after completing this painting, almost 20 years after completing this painting, and almost 20 years rather after arriving in England, I made my first return sojourn to India, the place where I was born. One of the first places I visited was the former home of my adoptive paternal grandmother, or Didima grandmother, with whom I had been I'd been very close to as a young child, but who had passed away some years before my return. Didima had been widowed only days after her marriage. Unknown or unremembered to me at the time of making Housewives with Steak Knives, she was well known within the district where she had been living, as having been a strong devotee of the goddess Kali and a prototype feminist. Even more uncanny, I found, was that she had left in her will to me a small print kept on her mantelpiece of the goddess Kali, the design on whose clothing exactly matched the ikat design of the tunic I had purchased some time previously, and which I had incorporated onto the body of my painting Housewives. And indeed, the same tunic that I'd been wearing for some years before returning. On my return to England from India, I asked my mother why it was that when she had encountered my painting Housewives on exhibition at the ICA in 1985, the same year I had graduated, she had not mentioned these connections to me. She replied that when she had encountered my painting Housewives, that she assumed that I must have known. I didn't. It was around this time that I began to consider the spiritual, ghosts, and importantly, the unconscious, searching for the beginnings of my connection with goddesses and ghosts. Remembered as if seen through the eye of a bird, my mind travels across geographies, unraveling words and worlds like threads unraveling from the embroidered details at the edges of my mother's clothes. The etymology of my name, of my given name, Sutapa, is both a noun and a verb. I was told by my father that in Sanskrit it is associated with the spirit goddess of wisdom, existing in the masculine and the feminine. It is a spirit belonging to the underworld. My family's pet name, strangely for me, is derived from this Sanskrit word for ghosts or bhutas, a spiritual being who has the power to exist in a liminal space between one world and another. In classical Sanskrit, in tantric traditions, bhutas have a powerful and enigmatic entity known for their ability to reveal hidden knowledge and secrets. Often considered a lower realm spirit or ghost, the Kana Pisacini, interestingly, given what Cecilia has been talking about, is associated with the ear or the kanna and is said to whisper arcane wisdom directly into the practitioner's ear. Each child, it seems to me, has a spiritual dimension, an inner quiet gift to commune with dimensions beyond the immediate scope of being quantifiable via accepted traditions. We marvel and muse at their imaginings, which at times feels almost magical. Yet in the Western Eurocentric context, a child's ability to think in the abstract is something that by the age of 5 or thereabouts, our capitalized cultures begin to school out of them. I was born in Shantiniketan, in India, in 1962, during a time when my father, an agronomist, ecologist, and academic, was teaching at one of its universities, part of a complex of educational institutions whose founding philosophy was underpinned by a view that the arts, theatre, literature, philosophy, science, maths, physics sat together allowing the mind to study and flow between one discipline and another, a place where the physics and mathematics of the wider cosmos coexisted on stage, in a dance with the everydayness of life. Still an infant when my family left, I don't have many clear memories of this extraordinary place, but I do recall the mantra of my father's voice chanting the words dance, music, and play as being the very essence of life. It became a compass of sorts for me as I developed a deep connection to nature, trees, and to the animal world. The image that you see on screen here is actually a piece that I made probably between the age of about 15 or 16, if not a little bit before. It doesn't have a title that I remember. A connection sealed through witnessing the hypnotic concentration of women as they painted rangoli on brown earth with flour and colored spices during the many festivals or pujas each year, a time when children played with abandon, ate sweetmeats in the perch of trees, all in amongst the musical din of drums and prayers being chanted. All this in the open space beyond the mortal world, where even fireflies took one's gaze into the night sky and beyond. Like most children, I made art from a very young and very early age. However, it was perhaps when I first encountered classical Indian films in which characters with dark-skinned bodies and black hair who spoke in the same tongues as my parents being projected across the cavernous interior of a London cinema that I began to make the connections between art and life. Aware of the concentration of my parents' faces, though too young to follow the film's plotline. Sorry, my voice is a bit wobbly because the pollen count is so high at the moment. My attention was intermittently drawn towards the specks of dust momentarily suspended in the beams of projected light. Too young to articulate it, the triangulation between what was framed in the cosmic dance by the passing light film and my parents continued to hold me. The worlds of goddesses and ghosts continued to inhabit my life through the visuality of female divinities dotted about our home in makeshift shrines, in my mother's room, on mantelpieces, and on kitchen calendars. An image from an old calendar of a goddess adorned the space above my bed. In her 8, not 2 arms, she carried an assortment of objects ranging from a dahlia, flower, a bow, a spinning chakra, a sword, to a conch shell. Dressed in an embroidered red sari, a distinctive halo of light about her black curly locks of hair, she rode a Bengal tiger, confidently moving across the moonlit landscape. We communed often in the way that children do with pictures in books. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, my early paintings, made from the age of about 11, were depictions of mysterious adult female figures caught in the process of transformation as they emerge from the bark of trees in moonlight. In my mind's eye, they were goddesses and creatures of a matriarchal world to which they belonged and that inhabited my own imaginary. A hyphen between words or worlds either side of a hyphen. Between 1981 and 1985, I completed my bachelor's degree with honors in fine art with art history from the University of Leeds, also completing a full year's study in the history and philosophy of science. During my undergraduate academic year, a white female visiting lecturer who, without really understanding my upbringing or the matriarchal cultural references of goddesses with which I had been raised, yet claimed to be a feminist, made disparaging remarks about the works I was making in my studio at the time. These works portrayed the female body morphing, transgressing from one form of figuration into another, which the tutor claimed were simply complying with the stereotypically oppressive representations of women that were found within the mainstream dominant culture, without specifying that she was referring to the Western canon. Hierarchically implicit in her remarks was a notion that the Western canon was what was significant. When I raised examples of works by the artist, for example, of Leonore Feeney, as surely falling outside of the stereotypes which she herself referenced, the tutor asserted that whilst Feeney had the knowledge, skills, and intellect to circumnavigate and subvert such dominant stereotypical representations of women, that my works, for example, the one here, not only didn't do this, but that I was incapable of achieving this. The experience was a rude awakening of sorts to me. Undermining, it was not reflective of a feminist ideology in which there is an equal exchange and willingness to listen or learn from voices outside the dominant Eurocentric narratives. This encounter did not sit in isolation of some of the broader issues in fine art and the art history course, which, although claimed to be embedded in an approach to studying art history through a radical Marxist post-structuralist lens, was nevertheless very Eurocentric. And so it was that in my painting, Housewives with Steak Knives of 1985, was born in resistance, in anger, in defiance, and in commune with all the spirits and the deities that are both ordinary women and goddesses who captured my imagination and who I felt lived somewhere within me, deep within my own subconscious and psyche, and with whom I have since communed. Thank you.
So with all these goddesses in you,
Mm.
I hope you are dancing, music, and play. That you have this on.
Forever. Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, I do. And music keeps me going, actually. It reminds me so deeply of the love of music that my father and my mother instilled in me. And in moments of quiet and in moments of rage and in moments of happiness, in all frames of mind. Sometimes I can hear my father, sadly he's no longer with us, but sometimes I can hear his voice and his singing, in the same room and also from a different room and from the garden. So yes, music has occupied this very magical space for me the whole of my life and continues. So thank you.